What if the one thing that was meant to break you had the power to help someone else to survive? Welcome to Healing Through Chaos, the podcast where pain is transformed into purpose through powerful storytelling. It's the one place you will find licensed experts and survivors meet at the same table to talk lived experience and expertise. I'm your host, John Tay, and this is where your healing journey begins. On today's episode, we talk people pleasing with my girl, licensed and marriage family therapist, Miss Candice Coughenour. Welcome, Candice.
Oh, thank you so much, Shantae. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And again, y'all, we just finished About Her Business on my other podcast, and the episode just released this week. So you guys be sure to go over to YouTube and check that out. Are you ready to get started today, Candace?
Oh, yeah, let's go.
Okay, perfect. So you described yourself as a recovering people pleaser. When did you first recognize the patterns in your own life?
I think I'm still recognizing the patterns. I Being a people pleaser is not something I really knew about myself until I was in grad school learning how to be a therapist. That is when those patterns really came to light in a very aggressive way. Being in a grad school program like I was, it was called out a lot with like love and support, but it was definitely called out. And it took me a while to even see it, but I think I've known for a really long time. I just didn't have the, like, vocabulary for it.
Mhm. And you make a great point there because as a person who's a current student getting my degree, and I identify with that as well because I feel like you have to put yourself up into a place of where you have to pretty much kiss up to the instructors or kiss up to your supervisors to get there. So it's like you never get to really be yourself in that moment. So thank you for actually sharing that you actually went through that in grad school. So you are a licensed marriage and family therapist. Let's get into that clinical perspective for a second. How do you define people pleasing and how is it different from just simply being kind or in some cases cooperative?
There's a giant difference between kindness and people pleasing. Often, though, people use it interchangeably. I define the difference as people pleasing is when you are considering other people or the context more than yourself. So, like, your consideration for self is smaller. Another way of identifying that would be like self abandonment. So, if I'm being kind, I am working in my circle of control to help you because I have the ability to. I feel comfortable doing so. It's something I want to do. People pleasing is when I don't have the time to do it. I'm pulling myself out of my circle of control. I'm doing it probably because I want you to like me or I want you to feel comfortable, or let's see if I can explain this succinctly. But people pleasing is really just a sneaky way of showing up with your defense mechanisms on. So people pleasing sounds very much like for the other person. But if we're being really honest, it is self soothing our discomfort with other people's discomfort or their dysregulation. And dysregulation isn't good or bad. We all need it. It helps us learn and grow. But as a people pleaser, I would show up in scenarios and try to soothe everybody else for my own comfort. And I've learned now and I still practice it. I could really cut all that self-soothing time in half by just soothing myself, soothing my own thoughts, my own feelings, my own actions in my circle of control. Usually people pleasing starts at a young age. We're taught by the adults around us. So by the time I was in grad school, I didn't realize it was a defense mechanism. It was a way of survival. It was the way I knew how to interact and be in relationship with people. So I was showing up over functioning in a lot of relationships, and that is not good. That is self-abandonment. It is not alignment. And there's a time and place for it. There are still times where my best friend needs something and I don't want to do it, but I will because I've like consciously chosen that. I'm not doing it to survive, and that is a specific and important difference.
And you hit on a key aspect because it definitely started for me in childhood. I had the pressure of being the oldest child and setting that standard, so I would always go the further distance than my sisters would to please my parents, to please my aunties, my grandparents. I was the yes ma'am, no ma'am type of girl, and, you know, growing up, once I got to a certain age, I really felt like I didn't have an identity at all. So Let's talk about that childhood experience for a second. What are the most common childhood or social conditioning factors that create chronic people pleasing?
So it can show up in any child in any family dynamic. However, the go-tos that I think of is it's typically like a firstborn daughter. And part of that is birth order is important, right? But usually the first child has different expectations. The other ones do. And that's it's not good or bad. It is, but it does have an effect. Women in families and cultures, but also societally, often have an expectation that they are going to be pleasant, they are going to be submissive, they're going to be kind. I use with air quotations because I was taught to be nice to others, which really what I was being taught was to people please others. If somebody's uncomfortable, make yourself small so they don't feel discomfort. And I think that that happens for boys and non-binary people and all of that. I think that's happening everywhere. I'm speaking about it for women because I'm a woman and I see a lot of women clients that go through that. And we live in a society that has really, I mean, the patriarchy has set that up. And so a lot of factors are the narratives that we're taught by the adults around us. And I by no means am here to blame everybody's mom because my mom got the same messaging, right? Like, this is passed down trauma. I was joking with my partner yesterday, and I was like, "Oh, we should do one of those videos where, people go around and they're like, 'Take the dollar or double it and pass it on.'" And I was like, that's what trauma is. Every generation, it's like, take the trauma or double it and pass it on. So by the time that I've received this, it is the heaviest expectation. It is normalized in my family. It is just what little girls do. But then I grew up into an adult that didn't have any identity because I learned my identity based on relationship to others. So I didn't understand myself outside of pleasing other people. And that doesn't mean I was this angel child. I acted out and I had feelings, but oftentimes my feelings were bigger than the adults around me could handle. And I received a lot of messages of, well, don't cry about that. You have nothing to be sad about. Look at all this happiness. Let me cheer you up. Let me shove rainbows and butterflies down your throat. And like to be fair, my parents are dealing with a screaming child. Like they're trying, but I don't know if it's the best that they could do. But that's not because they had they didn't have the information to do better either because that's what their parents taught them. So, this is a long-winded way to say it for anybody that feels like they might be a people pleaser, I would check in. What narratives, what messaging did you receive from the adults around you in childhood? And it doesn't have this can come along when you're 5, you're 13, you're in high school, you're in college, like, messages are constantly being thrown at you. It's important to look at which ones did you pick up, and are they promoting alignment and consideration for yourself, or are they promoting other people's comfort? And I say this all the time, by no means am I saying do not consider other people. Consider other people in the context. Just don't overly consider other people at the expense of yourself.
And you know, you said it was the long-winded answer, but honestly and truly, I feel it was the best answer because in that I identified with being a kid and you was the kid that was crying all the time or complaining or screaming all the time. And, mom and dad was doing their best to try to help you figure things out. But it was like they didn't have the tools that we have now today, which is one of the greatest things about the advancements of the mental health field is the research is now there to, help parents out in those cases. And in some cases, you may still not know. So that's the importance of knowing when to incorporate a licensed professional, you guys. Now, one of the greatest things about one of the things about being a people pleaser is you're always achieving. And for me, it even showed up in the workplace. So, why do you think high achieving individuals seem especially vulnerable to people pleasing?
I think it does go hand in hand a lot of times because in the workplace, it's promoted, like figuratively speaking, but literally, people that are over functioning in their role are often praised for that. Hopefully, at least they're getting promoted and paid more for it, but it's kind of the social expectation in the workplace as well, right? We're not gonna promote Sally because she keeps questioning everything we're doing, but, Sandy, boy, is she already ahead of the game. She's anticipating my need before I even asked her. That's what we're looking for. And though that kind of sounds nice, what that's actually saying is the employer, am not regulating myself. I'm not being clear in my communication. I'm not setting the pathway for every individual, every employee to have the same expectation. And it is creating avenues for anybody that is used to overfunctioning in relationships to step in and what we might call overachieve. But if we're like the dark side of overachievement is still abandonment of self, depending on what we're talking about. So if I'm staying late at work, I am answering emails over the weekend, I am anticipating my boss's needs, I am regulating other people's emotions, not letting other full grown adults regulate themselves, I'm gonna be praised for that in our society. I mean, things are changing, absolutely, but for the most part, like, a people pleaser is a gold mine, right? Because they're just gonna keep saying yes. Even if they can't or wanna say no, they're gonna pick up the extra project. They're gonna go the extra mile. And that doesn't mean they can't do it. Chances are they are excelling in that. There are also people pleasers though that and I think every people pleaser probably experiences this where they get burnt out. They've said yes to too many things. Now they don't have enough space in their life to recharge and regulate themselves and then they kind of freeze or break down or shut down and then they're like freaking out because they don't understand their identity if they're not helping everybody around them. And that can be very, like, jarring, it can be very hard to understand, and that's honestly when a lot of my clients see me, whether that's professionally at work or that could look like all of a sudden I look around and all I know is to identify myself as a mom, right? Because your identity is in your kids, and it's showing up for everybody else first, and then maybe if you're lucky, considering yourself. So professionally, I mean, not to say that any employer is diabolically plotting against you, but I mean, if someone came up to me and they're like, "Yeah, I'll take on that extra project," I'd be like, "Yeah, great." My hope is I'm not gonna people please them and be like, "Are you sure you can do that?" Right? It's about every single individual being as congruent as possible, communicating their needs, being clear with their boundaries. We just live in a society that doesn't do that and doesn't normalize it, so there's a lot of opportunity and avenues for under and over functioning.
And I'm a person who has always tried to, go that extra mile in the workplace. So I would be the person to, if they give me a document, I create 5 different documents so you can pick which one you like. But everybody knows that takes time.
Mhm.
So whereas I could have created just one document and, spent my time on something that I would like, I spent my time on helping you. And, sometimes it's not even rewarded. It's not even acknowledged. In my case, it wasn't even acknowledged in some cases, just was, that's expected of you. So thank you for hitting on all those key points. But now let's get into where a lot of us, especially myself, have problems, and that's setting boundaries.
Mm.
A lot of people look at this as being the worst thing. It may go against your religion, it may go against, family traditions. Let's talk about it. Can you explain what is happening psychologically for a person who may feel guilty for setting a boundary?
My first question for anybody that tells me, "Well, Candace, I can't set a boundary, I feel guilty." My question is, what does guilty actually mean? What does it actually look like? What does it feel like and sound like? Now, there are times where we feel guilty. A lot of times, I think people are misidentifying the feeling. And if we have a long lived experience of not setting a boundary and often being told when we try to set that boundary that we're bad, we're doing it wrong, we're not nice, chances are it's just unfamiliar. And if we don't have the support for our boundaries to be respected off the bat, which boundaries take time. Your boundaries are your responsibility. They are the level in which you participate with something. So I'm going to zoom out for a second because in marriage and family therapy, we start with the understanding of cybernetics. And cybernetics is just a fancy term that talks about how when you are in a relationship, you create a unit and it is like a computer. That's where cybernetics comes from. Basically, if you look at any grouping of people as a computer system, we are all kind of in the same cycle. So I am, I'm circling around and it's a perfect circle because everybody's doing their job, right? Like just think about gears and cogs in a machine. If one is out of place, the whole thing shuts down. So if in your machine, in your unit, the homeostasis, the thing that keeps that circle circling is you not creating boundaries for yourself. As soon as you start to say, I'm not going to do that, your cog shifts and it creates a wobble in that circle. And subconsciously, we all feel that and we're like, danger, danger. We all go in survival mode. So let's see, for example, this is not necessarily a true story, but it is somewhat related to me. In my family, we're a soccer family. My dad is 60 years old and just stopped playing soccer. Okay. So I grew up playing soccer. Luckily, I loved it. It was not something I was forced into. I really enjoyed it. At some point, I didn't want to play soccer anymore. And I quit my senior year of high school. Now, thankfully, my dad was actually very supportive of that. If I didn't live in a family or a unit that was supportive of that, what that might have looked like was we're a soccer family. This is what we do. We go to practice, we play games, we talk about soccer, 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 soccer. It's how we all understand each other. Well, Candice doesn't want to play soccer anymore. So my cog moves and it creates a wobble. And so what's happening is I am doing something different. And the system relies on me doing the same thing. So if my system was like, no, you have to play soccer. What do you mean? This you're so good at it. You need to continue playing, whatever. They would be forcing me back into the same. That is a lot of times what people would say, I feel guilty because the people around me are not respecting my boundaries and they're not comfortable enough with the change. And to be fair, wow, I had been playing soccer for 13 years. What a big change up. But you can insert soccer with literally anything else, and that same cycle will happen. I was lucky that my parents were able to go with the flow and be like, you don't have to play soccer if you don't want to. Now, there were plenty of experiences in my life where that wasn't the case. And I was then receiving messages that, how dare I do something outside of the norm? How dare I do something different? And not that they necessarily use those words, but their actions or the things that they said to me relayed those messages. So, all of this to say, when we zoom in the moment that you set a boundary in a unit that is used to you doing not that, it's going to create a wobble. That circle is going to create a wiggle, and everybody's going to be uncomfortable. If you're a people pleaser, you've been taught up until this point, everybody else's discomfort is your responsibility, so you better do something about it. And usually that looks like falling back in line to keep the peace. The next best thing to do is to regulate yourself because you're wildly uncomfortable in this new state of being, and do your best to continue participating in the way that makes sense for you. You can consider other people and how that might affect them. Like the soccer example, I guess. My dad was my coach for a really long time. He wasn't my coach when I quit, but wow, that really affects our relationship because that's been a shared activity for years and years and years of my life. He's probably going to grieve that. That's okay. He can. That doesn't mean I have to do anything differently. So, first question is that actually guilt? What does that mean? And usually, guilt means you are doing something out of alignment with your core values, means you are doing something, saying something, feeling something that's not in alignment with who you truly are or want to be. Me quitting soccer, there was nothing to feel guilty about because it had not, like, it doesn't affect my core values. I'm still being a kind, respectful person. I'm still acting in alignment with my beliefs. How that affects other people, not really in my circle of control. So, first question is, are you actually guilty? And then I guess another question to answer that is like, what are you actually feeling? Pull out a feelings wheel, identify your feelings. Chances are you're feeling more than one and lean into that. That's the start of regulating through that discomfort. So I guess my my answer is like, I don't know. Are you actually guilty? And if you are, that is a different story and maybe something like that's a different path. But for the conversation of today, I would stick on maybe you're not guilty. What are you feeling? And then work through that and maintain your actions and try to reframe your thoughts that are in alignment with what you truly know for yourself because you know yourself better than anybody else. And it doesn't matter what your mom says, she does not know you better than you.
And again, you hit on some major key points and identifying myself because as a person who just thought I had to fall in line and get the typical 8 to 5 job like the rest of my family and, decided to go on my own journey, it did take away, that bonding that me and my family had with that 8 to 5 connection. So thank you for using those examples. And another thing that you hit on was feeling guilty from being so helpful. So, what are the early warning signs that an individual can identify with saying they've helped too much versus say they've self-abandoned themselves?
So the idea of helping is a funny one because the first question is like, is this person even asking for my help? Right. So going back to your example of I'm going to create 5 documents. Did anybody ask you to do that? And what we might be calling helpful is actually like caretaking somebody that doesn't need our help. And this is one of the most beautiful things I took away from grad school is everyone was constantly saying like when you take care of somebody that doesn't need your help, that is a full-grown adult that is able to do it without you, you're sending the message that they're fragile, they're incompetent, they're unable. And I know as a people pleaser, I I thought that was coming from like this generous, kind place. And it was, but it was also really, like, rooted in this, like, shadowy, tricky stuff of, I'm mind reading the other person. So this goes into the thoughts, when we consider self. Self is broken down into your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions. Those are the things in your circle of control. So for me, a lot of my mind reading, a lot of my helping came from mind reading what I thought other people needed. Was I a really good guesser? Yes. Did I get it right a lot of the times? Sure, but at the expense of me, at the expense of the relationship between me and the other person, and it also affected them because I'm sending them the message, "I don't think you can do it without me." And sometimes that's true, but my hope is the other person has identified that for themselves and said, "Hey, Jonte, I actually need 5 of these worksheets. Can you make them?" And any moment that's not happening and you show up with 5, like, I would just be curious, like, what message are you sending?
Oh, I love that, and I think I healed a little in that conversation because you hit on a great point. Nobody was asking me to create all these documents. I was just doing it because I thought, whatever was on their mind at the time. So you hit on a great point, and thank you again. Now let's talk about your own recovery.
Mhm.
What was the hardest belief about yourself that you had to unlearn?
Oof, there are so many, and I'm still unlearning all of them. I think a lot of my people pleasing came from a fear of being alone, being unliked. I found my value in other people validating me. There's this memory coming to me. I'm in 3rd grade. My my 3rd grade teacher was Dr. Quinn, or not doctor, he was Mr. Quinn, and I remember staying up late creating extra credit that he did not set. He didn't say, "Here's extra credit, do it." I just did extra work and turned it in and said, "I did extra credit." At this point, I'm in 3rd grade, I don't actually understand extra credit. I got such good feedback and I was praised for that, and I feel like that was a really pivotal point for me because that's somebody outside of my parents that is aligning with what I had been taught inside of my family, right? Go above and beyond, don't half-ass it, don't stay complacent, do the next best thing, and by no means are any of those bad messages, but when you're in 3rd grade and you don't have the context and the live experience to understand when that's appropriate and when that's not, it starts to solidify narratives about self that you take on forever. So, I'm creating flashcards for something that nobody asked me to do. I then got credit for it. So I'm like, I wish that didn't happen because what a great learning experience that would be. Whatever. Mr. Quinn was doing his best. He's like, "Okay, great. You can have 3 extra points and a sticker." Like what does a third grade teacher do with that? And I learned from that moment, if I do more, people will like me. If I do more, I will get validated. If I do more, I will appear to be smart. If I do more, if I do more, if I do more. Like all of these seemingly good narratives would come from me. Other people would perceive me in a way that I wanted them to. And I think that's another part of people pleasing. It's this illusion of control of how people see you because that's what we're doing when we're mind reading somebody. We're trying to anticipate what they're thinking about us or what they might need. And again, we can call it help. But if we're being really honest, and if I'm being really honest, a lot of my helping came from my fear of being witnessed or to like, what if somebody didn't like me? And like, I now live, I'm 30 years old. There are plenty of people that don't like me. I'm lucky that I don't really care about that anymore because I like me. But when we're so focused on our identity being based on how other people perceive us, we're not creating an identity, we're creating a reaction to others. So a lot of my healing had to start with me figuring out who the fuck I am. Like, who am I? What do I actually like? What do I want? How much of my identity is a reaction or an anticipation of what other people wanted from me? And that is an ongoing experience for everybody, regardless of people pleasing or not. People pleasing just adds a separate step.
I love that as you were talking, learning what's best for you and setting those boundaries. Can you walk us through example of how you would set a boundary?
No.
Okay, moving on.
No, no, no.
Oh,
That's the boundary.
oh,
That's it. That's all you need.
oh, wow. It's just as simple as what she said, for real. Like, literally learn how to say no and actually mean it. Like, if you tell a person that I'm not going out Friday night with you to have drinks, well,
Mhm.
in here, don't go. I mean, you have to literally learn how to say no and set that boundary of what you mean is what you say. And I mean, it was just as simple as that. And it came by surprise for me. So I know it's going to be a surprise for y'all.
Absolutely. So let's talk about that for a second, right? We have set this up and I knew you were going to ask me questions. You're anticipating that I'm going to answer them, right? When I hit you with just a no, what happened for you?
Like, wait a minute. Okay, now Candice, you normally you give an example or you go into some detail, but it was a simple no. And you know, I love that example. Like that was like the perfect way of showing a person who may be right now going through that stage of a person's asking them something and they don't feel in connection or alignment with it. No.
Absolutely. Now, in our relationship, you respected my no, and you're like, okay, let's go on to the next question. Right?
Yeah.
Now, in a different relationship, you might be like, no, you're supposed to elaborate. You're supposed to answer these things, right? And none of that's in my circle of control, right? I figured I'd take a shot and say no and see what happens. But what a beautiful real life example of a boundary. And thank you for respecting it. Now, here's some more explanation on that. If Jonte wasn't gracious and respectful of my boundary, my responsibility is to continue to say no, right? Now you might be like, "Oh, but Candace, like you always have such good answers, blah blah blah." And a younger version of me would be like, "Wow, you're right. I will answer that question. I'm going to participate in something even though I don't want to." A version of me now that wasn't trying to make an a point would still continue to say, "Hey, I hear you. This is not something I'm going to participate in." Or I'm happy to answer a different question or whatever. So that was very hard for me for a very long time. Like, it's still hard for me, but the best homework I ever received in grad school was from my professor, Yuna. And I think it was the whole semester, all our homework was every single class was to say no without an explanation. I know it sounds easy, but it is very hard. When our society expects it and it like our society expects an explanation as to why we're saying no, as if as if other people deserve an explanation of our boundaries. It took me weeks to start being able to just say no. I would say, "No, I can't because blah, 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 blah," and try to, like, give evidence as to why it was okay I was saying no to somebody. But you don't have to explain anything to anybody. Now, this isn't like a license to go be a dick to your friends or to people. You still have to consider them. But if this is how I know my answer is no. If there is a moment in my body where everything is just kinda like, ugh, that my next answer has to be no because I don't wanna do it. The people pleaser in me would be like, "Just push through and get over yourself, help somebody." And then if I couldn't do that, so I had to say no, I would explain all of these reasons. And I was actually taught, I think my parents really struggle with boundaries too. Anytime I saw them creating a boundary, well, I don't even know if it was actually creating a boundary or they were helping me when I was young. They're like, just say that you can't because I said no. And I'm like, but I don't want to go. And they're like, yeah, but just say that I said no. Right. So they were coaching me to create an excuse to give evidence as to why it was okay for me to make a boundary. At this point, I don't need any evidence. And like, with the most respect, I don't care if you don't agree with me.
I love it. And again, y'all, this is what I love about my girl Candice. She's able to take my lived experience, her lived experience, and take the educational aspect of it and break it down so we can all understand what we're going through. And hopefully both of our stories are identified with you guys today. But again, I just want to thank you for using that skill on that question. Like it threw me for a loop, y'all. I was like, okay, wait, are we moving to the next question, or is that literally just the answer to the question? So thank you for actually giving that example to our audience. I surely appreciate it.
Absolutely. I mean, right? You were expecting me to do more of the same, and I did something different, and that is a shock to the system. So it's a reminder that other people are going to be taken aback by your boundaries from time to time. Stay firm, keep practicing them, participate in what you want, and don't participate in what you don't want.
Absolutely. Now, we've been talking about validation for a couple of minutes now. So, how can someone shift from external validation to internal validation when their identity has been built on, say, approval?
There's so many different ways. My like first directive when I have a client is I invite them to write 3 things they like about themselves or did well, and it doesn't have to be like rainbows and butterflies, I'm talking neutral statements, and practice that daily, whether you write it down or you say it to yourself or you text yourself. What's happening is you are turning your focus inward and you are starting to validate yourself, even if it's just neutral, of like, I got through work today. I sent the email I didn't want to send. Or maybe it's more of like, I'm really creative and I'm very good at my job, or something that you liked, because it's going to start creating a focus that's pushing you inward instead of being like, John Tay, did you think I did a good job today? Right? Because, oh, hi, Clarence, my cat's coming to visit. And he always thinks I did a good job. So think literally consciously choosing to look at yourself is the first step. And there's so many different ways of doing that. I mean, therapy is a great way of doing that because that's 50 dedicated minutes of looking at yourself. Even in the therapy room, we have to be mindful. I'm in therapy, so I have to my therapist is fantastic. So she is really like, sometimes I'm hinting at I want validation. She's like, good luck. I'm not giving it to you. As a therapist, I also have to be mindful. I'm seeing a lot of people pleasers. There are times where I will, and it's like a therapist taboo. Everybody has their own opinion. Like, should you tell your client you're proud of them? Sometimes I do. But other times I stand there silent and I'm like, you say what you're gonna say. I'm not jumping in on this. I'm not gonna perpetuate this pattern that you're looking for. So go to therapy. Make sure you have a good therapist. If your therapist is telling you you're doing the best job all the time, probably not challenging you enough. And that's not what a people pleaser needs. A people pleaser needs someone that's gonna look at them and be like, what's going on? Where is this coming from? Why are you doing this? And it's as simple as like when my clients need to reschedule and I give them times, they're like, well, what works best for you? And I'm like, this isn't about me. I already told you what works best for me. Which time do you want? And it seems silly, and to some people that aren't used to it, it can seem standoffish. But my boundaries aren't mean, and that took a really long time to accept.
Oh, and again, you hit on another key aspect of how to identify a great therapist because my therapist was the same way. And what it allowed me to do while I was in therapy was talk my way through to understand myself. And oftentimes, when you're in therapy and you're able to just talk through whatever it is you may be going through, in my case, it was people pleasing and anger. I was able to identify where I was hindering myself. And that's the beauty of therapy. It allows you to get those thoughts out while at the same time hearing yourself talk so you can now get it to register in that brain. So, um, again, Candice, you hit on them points. Now we're getting closer to the end of today's episode, and I only have a few more questions left for you. I want to talk about empathy.
Mhm.
Now, we all have that empathetic self in us. We all have that sympathetic self in us. But what does healthy empathy look like versus, say, giving all your emotional overload to someone?
It's a good question. That's a hard one too. And part of that is like I will have my definition of empathy. You will have your definition of empathy. Like when I have my therapist hat on, my first question for people is like, what does empathy look like for you? And then we're gonna work in that perspective and I'm gonna push at it, right? But healthy empathy is when self is still a part of your pie chart. And what I mean by that is this is my favorite visual aid. This is a pie chart. Self, other, context. Okay. This is what we can consider when we are in relationships and living life. Okay. Self, if we zoom in on self, right? We zoom in. This is what our pie chart of self looks like. It's our thoughts, feelings, and actions. Now, a people pleaser usually looks like this or some variation where other is so big. Okay. So we might call that empathy. I'm empathizing with you. I'm considering you. I want the best for you. But if self isn't, sometimes it's not even in the pie chart, right? Like, let's be honest, sometimes it disappears. Okay. If self is smaller, chances are that is, you're not even considering yourself. You really can't consider somebody else because your understanding of everything starts with your understanding of self, your thoughts, feelings, and actions. Now, there's no one way of doing this. Personally, though, I don't consider myself in the moments that I overthink. So I think my way through emotions, which doesn't actually exist. You have to feel your emotions, but I'm very analytical. So I rely on my thoughts and then I ruminate. And I'm like, well, Sally must be mad because of this. I might be using emotional words, but I'm analyzing it. So if your thoughts, feelings, and actions aren't in alignment, this is not going to be in alignment. And then you can't actually be empathetic because you're not like accurately considering yourself, others, and context. So I think empathy is when we show up congruently for ourselves and then we can congruently consider others in context. That's where there's enough space for me to empathize you while still considering and being responsible for me.
And again, y'all, she's giving y'all the examples. So I hope everybody, and we're going to make sure that we zoom in on that pie chart so we actually, so you guys can actually see what Miss Candace just did. Now, let's talk about the nervous system because people pleasing affects the nervous system at a crucial rate, honestly and truly. Like my nerves, once I started my nervous system healing, like, I could not even hold a pen without shaking, how bad nerves were. And just a simple, "Hey, it's 6 o'clock," would make me pop off, and I would be, screaming to the top of my lungs on everybody. So, what daily tips and tools can help rewire people-pleasing patterns at the behavior and nervous system level?
Yeah, the nervous system is a big part of it. So I love teaching people about the nervous system. You don't need to know a lot to start. The starting of it is knowing that your nervous system is tied to your regulation. So many people have heard of a survival stance or survival mode when we're in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. People pleasers typically go to fawn, right? I'm going to make everything outside of me peaceful, even though I'm crumbling inside, right? Which usually leads to a shutdown or a freeze mode anyway. I talk to clients a lot with the hand brain method from Dan Siegel. So if my fist is my brain, my fingers is my frontal lobe, and in my frontal lobe lives my frontal lobe, lives my prefrontal cortex, which is in charge of my problem solving, my effective communication skills. This is something that isn't developed until you're like 25, 26. This is why kids do impulsive things. They don't have it. So when my third grade teacher is praising me for my extra credit, I take that as that's true for everything and I need to do that forever. I don't have the effective problem solving skills or understanding of my context to know that there are nuances. And so we need that to be online, to be regulated. When it's not online is when we flip our lid. So when our fingers are flipped, what happens is our thumb, which is our amygdala, which is inside of our brain, and that is the thing that keeps us alive. It is the thing that goes on red alert. Red alert, red alert, you're in danger. So this looks like, back in our history when we're living in caves and we're like, the birds aren't chirping anymore. The last time the birds weren't chirping, Kronk down the road got eaten by a predator. Okay. So we are noticing a pattern, right? The birds aren't chirping. Our lid flips. We're no longer problem solving. We are in, what do I do to stay alive? So the go-tos are fight or flight. But through time, we've realized that there's also freeze and fawn. And I'm sure there's even more. We're still constantly learning about the brain. But when our lid is flipped, so to speak, when we are in survival mode, our nervous system is on the fritz. It is not working the way we need it to effectively problem solve. In order to do that, we need to close our lid. We need to put our frontal lobe back online so we can effectively problem solve. So we can consider not only just our emotions, our fear of dying, but the logic of it. We can analyze it. So I say that because that understanding for me was so helpful. It stopped me blaming myself and was just like, oh, my system thinks I'm in danger. And if we're being really honest with ourselves, we, like, through evolution, we started as a species that if we did not have a village, we died. Right? So if we weren't liked, if we were outcasted, we died. We didn't have the survival. I mean, obviously some people probably did, but if you didn't have a community, if you didn't have support of others, you had a lower chance of surviving. That's still in us. So when I say I was afraid people didn't like me, logically, we know today I would survive. I would still live. I might not thrive, but there's a part of us deep in us that's like, red alert, we're gonna die. And people feel that feeling. And I wonder if maybe that's something that's coming up when we're like, I feel guilty if I say no. It's like, or are you just afraid that you'll be outcasted from the village and, die? And I don't need to joke about that, but there is this innate fear that if I don't have support, if people don't like me, what will happen? And I don't think anybody, sometimes people are, and that's a different conversation, but I think it's important to notice that so we can say, okay, what is my survival response? For me, it was fawn and freeze. And if I'm pushed hard enough, it's fight. I will get I'll get verbal and mean because I'm trying to protect myself. So what you need to do is to realize you are in that mode. Usually, like for me, that means I'm really sweaty. It means my body is tense. It means I'm doing that like, ugh, I don't want to. I'm going into defend mode. After you realize that, the next best thing you can do is regulate. And that could look like mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, whatever that means for you. For me, my best next step is to take a deep breath, like a deep belly breath, because I'm engaging my nervous system and I'm telling it I'm safe. Sometimes it's like rubbing my arm saying like, it's okay, you're safe, right? Like literally self-soothing. I always invite people to think, when you were a kid, how did you get soothed as a child? A lot of us were rocked. I have a chair in my office that rocks. So at this point, it's second nature for me. If I'm getting a little nervous for whatever reason, I start rocking because my nervous system is like, "Oh, we're safe." Because baby me was safe being rocked by my mom in a rocking chair. We we're still toddlers inside, so it doesn't have to be this big, like, dramatic thing. It can be, but sometimes it's as simple as rubbing our arms, squeezing our fists, rocking in a chair. I invite everybody, I mean, Pinterest, YouTube, all of those things, you can look up regulation techniques, mindfulness techniques, grounding techniques. That's what I mean when I say close that lid, because that's going to put the part of your brain that knows what you need to do to get out of the situation back online.
And a couple of more examples I can add to that is for me, it was just getting up, going outside, taking a walk. It could be as simple as if you can't get up from your desk, just tapping your leg for a little minute. That's what my grandmother did, and it will always soothe her. If you're allowed, humming. That was something that soothed my grandmother as well, and it soothes me just to hum for a second. So just those little things, and even if you can't do any of those things, writing it down, journaling,
Mhm.
that's another escape. Anything that you could do. Now, I am a person that believes that eat healthy, but if you're in that mood that day, giving yourself your favorite treat. That
Yeah.
is not a you failed your diet moment. It's a you're making yourself feel safe and making yourself feel worthy and making yourself feel validated moment. So I've been there, I've done it, and I just wanted to add a couple more examples on to what Miss Candice had just given us. We come to the end of today's episode. And I want to ask you for our listeners out there who may recognize themselves in our conversation today. What is the first step they can take this week towards freedom from people pleasing?
My homework for most of my clients is consider yourself. Now, it sounds like a big ask, and it is, but it can be really small, tiny steps. So, just like you were saying, can you cook a meal that you actually want to eat and not just cook for everybody else? Can you take a break from work because even though you have a deadline, you need 5 minutes to go see the sun again? Those are small, tiny commitments to yourself that help you put self back in your pie chart. It doesn't have to be big because a lifetime of those small commitments add up. And if we're lucky, our ratio is geared towards alignment. And you're going to have plenty of moments in practice and opportunities. Don't get down on the moments that it didn't work out. Try to give yourself grace and try again. So, whatever considering yourself means is a really good place to start.
Sadly, you guys, because I can go on and on with my girl Candice, we've come to an end. But before we go, we want to make sure we get all of her information. Miss Candice is the proud owner of Congruent Soul Therapy. So we want to get all of her information and what state she's able to practice in.
So, I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I am licensed in the state of Georgia and Pennsylvania. I also have telehealth permission in the state of Florida. So, if you are a resident or know anybody that is a resident in those states, send them my way. If you are somebody that lives outside of those states but are still interested in connecting with me, check out Congruent Soul Therapy. I have free resources. I have a weekly newsletter that's actually called Somewhat Congruent. And I talk about my day to day experiences of people pleasing, overthinking, and working through that. And it is messy, and that's okay because humanness is messy. So if you related to this, you will definitely relate to that. And that's straight to your inbox. You can follow me on Instagram at Congruent Soul Therapy or at Candice underscore LMFT. And if you find me on my website or my Instagrams, I have a link tree there, and the rest is just easy peasy.
And we will be leaving all that information down in the description box. Thanks again to my girl, licensed and marriage family therapist, Candice Coughenour, for coming on and sharing her personal journey. And if today's message resonated, be sure to leave us the comments down in the comment section. Also, if you like stories such as these, be sure to subscribe so you never miss whenever we upload. Until we meet next time, keep your healing intentional, your boundaries solid, and your peace protected.